festival is a team effort by members of the workshop group and regular contributors to the magazine. I wish to thank them for their help and support, in particular Joanna, Maria and Penny, who are attending to our technical well-being, and Joanna and Leslie Burt for their publicity and administrative work. So this year's festival has the theme of lost connections, light and darkness, and occurs in the shadow of a global pandemic, Black Lives Matter, far-right extremist and inept governments, especially here and in the US, ill-informed right-wing zealots, unpredictable climate change, and continued loss of rare and endangered species. Previous festivals had the themes of difference in the other, visionaries and outsiders, identity, and the politics of engagement. To me, they evoke a much happier time, with memories of readings by departed friends such as Lee Harwood, Barry McSweeney, Doug Oliver, Irina Ratushinskaya, John Silkin, as well as the joys of offering an alternative to the many one-dimensional and identical festivals at that time. In 1995, we celebrated the passing and life of David Gascoigne, whose poetic involvement went back to the 30s and 40s, an era when the Little England mentality was considered a mark of restrictive growth and development, and internationalism and eclecticism in the arts and poetry was the hallmark of distinction. I've always taken inspiration from that period in terms of how to be inclusive and welcoming to a diversity of poetic approaches and endeavours. The festival's always tried to celebrate mavericks, visionaries and outsiders. Last year, we featured the remarkable poetry of Peter Larkin, and this year we celebrate Alan Fisher, a poet integral to the movement beyond a Wordsworthian approach to poetry. My connection to Alan, whom I know is an enormously friendly and generous spirit, is through the impact of poet, critic and editor Eric Mottram, a figure that's almost been written out of the history of English poetry since 1960 by the likes of Fiona Sampson, who negated his tenure as Poetry Review editor to almost a footnote in her recent book. Mottram was a remarkable figure in terms of his ability to make cultural connections. He saw those connections as a flat surface within processes, rather than one hierarchy with highs and lows of achievement. Mottram was a hard taskmaster, and one needed to be fully awake when talking and corresponding with him. He did not suffer fools, but was most generous with his time. This morning I was thinking about the first poetry festival that I organised, which was at the Windsor Great Park. It was done by letter, and I was amazed when the likes of Bill Griffiths, Bob Cobbing, Mohammed Jamal, Michael Moorcock and Tina Maris appeared to read. This evening I'm equally impressed and honoured by your presence in very different surroundings. So we're going to try and replicate some features of a physical festival by adopting a conversational approach. Please feel free to contribute to the Q&A sessions and enter the breakout rooms, which we've given some creative names to. So you may have a drink and chat at the White Horse, the Poet's Rest, the Lonely Cloud, Shelley Arms, the Ranter's Retreat, the Molly Bloom, the Black Bell, the Seven Sestinas, the Ashbury Tree, and so on. The core of the festival is the conversations that leads to new poems, areas of research and friendships and collaborations. Don't be shy to participate. Sadly, we don't have a bookstore this year. If there are books that are mentioned and you miss the details, please send me an email and I'll try my best to get you the details. I'm going to mention two books now, as I always do at this stage. One is Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, how fungi make our worlds, change our minds, and change our futures. An astounding study lauded by such critics as Robert Macfarlane, Jeremy Prynne, and Helen MacDonald. There's the book. The other is by Safia Sinclair, Cannibal, an evocation of a Jamaican childhood against the backdrop of American race relations, womanhood, otherness, and exile, seen through a reading of The Tempest. She writes in her preface about the etymology of the word cannibal from Caribou, a reference to the native Carib people whom Columbus thought ate flesh, and from whom the word Caribbean originated. By virtue of being Caribbean, she writes, all West Indian people are thus already, in purely linguistic sense, born savage. The Black Lives Matter movement has had a big impact. I've become more aware of the need for greater social inclusion. And to this end, we were delighted to offer bursaries to a range of people who may not otherwise be able to attend such an event as this. We will continue with that policy. So this brings me conveniently on to this evening's session on empire, race, and equality. But before I hand over to Maria, we're going to see a video by John Kinsella for the festival and the magazine. Over to you, Joanna.
Great, right. I shall share with you now.
Hi all, John Kinsella here. I'm dialing in, I guess, is what you say. We were on actually dial-up out here until a few years ago. I mean, literally dial-up, and we're not on wireless connection or anything. We're in the bush and on a slow copper line, which I don't complain about. D-Tech rather than hyping the tech is where I come from. But anyway, those issues aside, I'm here to support this wonderful journal. I have many copies of this, going right back. Tears in the Fence. I often think of it as Tears in the Fence as well. I have all sorts of reasons for that. I like the idea of tear and tear. And this is a magazine full of wordplay, full of investigation of language and its consequences, how it's deployed, how it's used, so on. It always carries a poetry of ideas and encounter, the textures of everything that surrounds us, and the consequences of how we talk about those textures. It's such a rich journal, full of ideas, and it's also a very generous journal. Generous in its reviewing of innovative literature, innovative poetry in particular. It always has David Caddy. That's David Caddy, the editor, David Caddy. Sorry, David. You get affectionately and respectfully. David always has his editor's notes, which I find exciting. Always read those closely. He has an eye and an ear for vital responses to consequence. And I think that's the key to the journal. It's not just a collation or a collection of pieces. It's about a conversation and a dialogue between writers who don't necessarily encounter each other. They encounter each other in the pages of Tears in the Fence. And there's an assemblage process going on in there. And I think David and other people, Ian Brinton and others who are involved in the journal over the years have really allowed those assemblages to move out of the pages, move all the way down here or up here, depending on how you see the globe. Jamtree Gully, Wheatbelt, Western Australia. What I'm going to do, just by way of celebrating Tears in the Fence and a very long reading of it. I mean, I've been sort of following this journal for a very long time, and it helps not only expand the kind of consciousness about what's being written, especially in innovative kind of ways in poetry in English, but in how it's talked about. Anyway, I'm going to read a poem in celebration of the journal. And it's from my graphology poems, a project. I chose this because I've been working on these since the mid-90s. And it seems to me that this is a magazine about longevity and encounter over a period of time with many different spaces. And these poems are about that too. In a way, they're almost concurrent. So this is Graphology Heuristic 75. So I read this as a kind of bizarre celebration of both Tears and the Fence, David Caddy as editor, and generous thinker and writer, and all those around the journal and all the contributors. So Graphology Heuristic 75. Two birds I can't identify are sorting seeds on the rough earth outside the library where books are taking root, reclaiming. The two birds appear to be placing some seed aside, poking other seed underground with variegated beaks, and shifting on their planting. Sometimes they snack on excess. They are wearying with activity, rest, chirp, puff their feathers, reconnoitre. Then back to it. Separated seeds, those asides, are divided further into 4 piles. Tetractus? From my discreet vantage point, I can see there's a pile of wattle seed, another of wild oats, and others I can't identify. I pride myself on access to a broad set of classifications, and yet I fail to locate on so many levels. To me, it seems secrecy. The sun is low in the sky and slices the southern shadows. Down there is where the two birds are now transferring the seed. Lift, glitter, descend, return. Over. I would guess in the hollow of a great York gum, deep in where it's mostly dry. So thank you. I wish you all well, and let's get behind this journal. Please support it, subscribe, donate, send material, talk about it. It's a vital part of the poetry community and many different poetry communities too. Okay, bye.
So that was fun. Maria, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope the sound is goes okay and everything is fine. I wanted to thank Joanna for supporting of our session is Imperial Consequences, Racism and Equality. And it couldn't come at a better time, in a time where, not far from where I live in Gloucestershire, in Bristol, we experienced not a long time ago the interesting toppling of the Colston statue that created a worldwide movement in support of the Black Lives Matter. But it is not just about Black Lives Matter. The session tonight, it is about writing and where we are as a community, as a group of writers trying to make a difference, to engage in dialogue, maybe to change particular systems. The guests we have tonight are Dzifa Benson, Sasha Akhtar, and Aiden Simmons. The session tonight is going to be, I would say, in 3 parts. The first part will be each guest will introduce themselves, as some of you might be new to the festival. And then after they introduce themselves, they will discuss a bit about their work as well as their interpretation of imperial consequences, racism and equality. And then we will have the second part, which will give all of us the opportunity to listen to our poets' work. And then we will have an open session of questions and answers. However, though, if you have any questions between now and then, you can please address them and put them in the chat box, and I will help you the session to coordinate between your question and the answers that will, and the dialogue that will carry on at the end of the session. The first poet we've invited here tonight is R Benson. Hello. Hello, Dzifa. Welcome. If you would like to introduce yourself and then discuss about your work and what is your experience of racism and equality as a writer, as a poet in Britain?
Okay, I'm R Benson. Hello, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight because David was the first person who published my poetry reviews ever. Before that, I didn't realize I was as interested in poetry. So, you know, it's this tears in the fence, like John, I want to say it both ways, is very dear to my heart. It's a fantastic journal and it gave me a start. So thank you, David. In terms of my writing and racism and equality, I guess, you know, my background is Ghanaian, so imperialism is very much, I suppose, something I look at in my writing, especially as I grew up in Ghana, and I guess I lived some of the experiences of the leftover from imperialism and colonialism. So a lot of my writing does address that, but maybe not directly. I think I'm quite lucky because I grew up in Africa, so racism wasn't very much in my growing up. In my grown-up years, it did, you know, I did face it when I came back to live in England. I was born in London. So I guess one of the poems, a couple of the poems I'm going to read today are about a woman called Sasha Akhtar, otherwise known as the Hottentot Venus. You may have heard of her. I'll say more about her when I actually read the poems. But she was brought over here from South Africa and displayed in those human zoos in London and Paris. And her legacy is still reverberating today. So, you know, I guess my work does address women. It does address underrepresented women. And also, the very first poem I wrote was about her, and it was in response to somebody saying something to me directly that was racist about my body type. So, you know, I guess responding to racism really fires me up, and I put it into my work. And I'd like to think my work also shows who I am and my stance in terms of social justice. And like you said, Maria, it's not just about Black Lives Matter. It's also about all those underrepresented people, including disabled people, transgender people, those kind of people. Because if, you know, and one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter is important is because once, you know, a group like that pushes for justice, is the kind of justice that affects us all. You know, it doesn't happen in a void. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Dzifa. And it's not only about color and race. We can say actually in the current economical, social and political climate, it can be actually about writing and the arts themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we think about the support they had throughout the pandemic and what is going on in terms of funding and supporting events or opening venues for the public to have access to. Thank you so much for your contribution, and we are looking forward to listening to you very, very shortly. Our next guest is Aiden Simmons. Good evening, Aidan.
Good evening. I have no
If you'd like to introduce yourself for people that don't know you yet, and also if you would like to discuss with us and introduce us your understanding, your perception and experience of racism and equality.
So for those who don't know me, I'm Aiden Simmons. I had my first poem published more than 50 years ago, believe it or not, but it wasn't until 2011 that I had my first book out. That was reviewed very kindly by Simon Smith in Tears in the Fence, which was my introduction to this wonderful mag. This is now my 5th Tears in the Fence festival, I think. So empire and its effects, racism and equality, it's a massive and vital subject that feels topical, but is in fact never untopical. So one I feel in some ways rather underqualified to talk about, at least from any point of personal experience. So let me start by checking my privilege. White, male, educated, straightforwardly heterosexual, able-bodied, not rich exactly by the standards of the society I live in, but certainly not poor. I never have to worry about where my next meal is coming from or whether I'll have a shelter and a bed for the night. These are all marks of privilege, most of which I'm sure I share with everyone at this festival, no doubt all of them with a good few of you, and perhaps most of you. And I think it's worth remembering the words of, I forget which wise philosopher, who said, if you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. So I have no personal claim on the topic at hand, though I can claim some descent from persecution, being just 1 or 2 generations from the Holocaust and 2 or 3 from the pogroms of the Russian Empire that caused the first major waves of Jewish emigration to the West. That diaspora has certainly had a massive influence on literature, not least the development of poetry, particularly in the Anglophone world. There are many cultural reasons I couldn't begin to untangle, even if I had time to do so, why there are so many Ashkenazi Jewish poets one could name, rather than say Kazakh poets or Georgian poets, or poets from any of the other nations that were suppressed under the imperial weight of Mother Russia. The hegemony of the English language is obviously a large factor, but I wonder if the simple fact of a large Jewish population having got out may also be significant. Kazakhstan, for example, the largest landlocked country in the world, is still, though nominally an independent state, to a considerable extent under the Russian yoke. While Russia, in all its historical iterations, has of course always been adept at oppressing its own people as well as those in its vassal states, some of the effects of that subservient status are still felt in various ways and to various extents in many of the former Soviet republics. And my poem Krasnogorsky, which I read at the 2017 Tears in the Fence Festival from my book Life Has Become More Cheerful, and which I will revisit part of this evening, bears on the persisting effects in a remote part of Kazakhstan of what I might call Soviet imperial power, as well as the legacy of the nuclear weapons madness, which is also a running theme through much of my writing. All this is to say that while I have no particular personal claim to speak for those who have directly suffered from racism, gender-based discrimination, or the rest of it, I have family background and some awareness of history behind my interest in such things. I have, personally, just once been shouted at and spat on by anti-Semites in my own hometown, the effect of which was probably to make me feel more kinship with the 1/4 of my inheritance that is Jewish enough for the Nazis to have condemned me had I been in that wrong place and time, but not quite Jewish enough to qualify for Israeli citizenship, should I want it, which I don't. UK citizenship feels bad enough just now. My first wife was Bengali, which led to an interest in Indian life and history, which of course meant largely British Empire history. Calcutta, when I stayed there in the early 1980s, was still very much a city of the Raj. It was just that the colour of the faces in the big houses and the posh clubs had changed. Eva, in fact, was half Bengali and half Scots, which I suppose made her by heritage doubly a victim of suppression by the English. But of course, it was the Indian aspect of her appearance that people noticed first and largely influenced reactions to her. Britain's empire, its erstwhile position as a global superpower, a status of which so many Brits still seem anachronistically and preposterously proud, had its origins in the 17th century, when naval supremacy began to give Britain the edge in establishing the transatlantic slave trade. Not that slavery was in any way novel, having been an expected way of life in many ancient cultures, and captured or defeated Britons themselves having been among the slaves of the Roman Empire, for example. But the three-way transatlantic trade that began in the 17th and ballooned in the 18th century was the basis of much of Britain's preeminence, the prime source of wealth of cities like Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and incidentally, of several of the families whose offspring now hold the reins of financial and governmental power in this no longer imperial little country. Along, of course, with a few from the old Russian Empire. Where does the name Boris come from? The British Empire in Asia may not have had institutionalised slavery in the way the Western colonies did, but there was never any shortage of manipulation and oppression, even if at times it masqueraded under a guise of philanthropy, a guise often cloaked arrogantly in terms of supposed religious superiority. That was the cloak or guise that came to describe itself as the white man's burden. And that reveals, I think, a fundamental point about the British, perhaps more widely the European version of empire, something which lies behind a huge portion of problems in the world today. And that is that racism, specifically racism based on skin tone, is largely a modern invention, designed to excuse the slave traders, slave owners, slave murderers, and those who behaved in at times equally murderous and cavalier ways in Asia and the South Seas. That wonderful comedian and commentator Reginald D. Hunter, having moved from the US to the UK, once described the British class system as a brilliant scheme that enables you to discriminate against people who look like you. He has a point, even though the roots of class in the feudal system almost certainly predate the kind of racism that has been endemic in the USA from the start. It's also true that anti-black racism is, among other things, a means of oppressing your white underclass by turning their antagonism on those below them in the pecking order and away from their less reachable oppressors, as illustrated, for example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, and described by Bob Dylan in his early song Only a Pawn in Their Game, in which the poor white remains in the caboose of the train. So to wind up, I'd just like to make a couple of observations on my own experience as editor of the online magazine Molly Bloom, any conclusion from which I'll leave you to make. The first is that of all the 186 poets I've featured in what is shortly to be 23 issues, 24 including the original print one from 1980, there have been just 2 of black or West Indian descent, Archie Markham and David Marriott, 2 of Indian subcontinent descent, Jess Mukherjee and Rahul Gupta, and 1, Vani Kapildeo, who might count as both. This is not an indication of any prejudice on my part against writers of whatever background, but perhaps a reflection of the kind of readership that's attracted to a magazine in a modernist tradition, as I've dubbed it. A sense that those of us who write or care about this kind of writing are collectively, however unintentionally, a kind of clique. And along with that goes the fact that only 3 of those 24 issues have included work from more women than men, and the overall balance is over 60% male. Again, this is not by choice. In fact, a disproportionate number of the contemporary poets I most admire are women, but simply because I receive almost 4 times as many submissions from men as from women. I don't believe there are more men than women writing, so perhaps it's a matter of relative sense of entitlement self-promotion versus self-effacement, expectation of privilege against the lack of that expectation, the inequality of those who have been raised to expect inequality.
Thank you very much for this. I will remember, and I will go back to your idea and point about the inequality and what can create. And later on, probably tonight, I will share with you some of my recent experience of the writing world in Britain in terms of the support they have offered for people that have been affected by COVID, for instance, or by the pandemic. As we move on with our event tonight, our guest, poet and writer Sasha Akhtar. Sasha?
Hello.
Hello. It's your first time at the festival.
Yes.
Welcome. And if you would like to introduce yourself for people that don't know you, I'm sure everybody knows you already, and also a few words about your work and about your experience of racism, equality, and the theme of
All
our
the
session
good
tonight.
stuff. All
The good stuff.
Right. Yep. You know, hi. Sorry. It's like all I have to do is hear that and I'm off. I was about to launch into some big it's been such a charged time, frankly. So I'm Sasha Akhtar. For anyone who speaks Urdu, it's Akhtar. And I am the author of 6 poetry collections somehow, and a single mother. And I have a mixed race background. So I have a white family and Pakistani family. You know, I just want to say, I love things to do with literary history. And I just want to say that it's lovely to be here tonight in this sort of long tradition of the Tears in the Fence Festival. And it was lovely to hear also who were the first readers at the very first festival. So a lot of my work, I always thought it had no direct relevance to anything that people, I felt it was expected of me when I first began, you know, that I looked at other South Asian poets. Basically, there weren't any, especially not women, and there were none writing in English. So I've always sort of felt like the only one in the village. No, it's true though, it's true. And the thing is that for a lot of us, you know, humor has been really, really important, because this word racism, it's a word, but there's so many layers to it that I personally myself, I mean, during the Black Lives Matter, sort of how it bubbled up and all this wonderful charged energy, I found myself in so many conversations and learning so much more about myself in relation to this. And one of the things, because a lot of my friends, we were having these conversations, was I found myself explaining about these layers. So, for example, I grew up in a family that was quite pale, and I am considered a bit paler. You know, I'm not dark or black, because in Pakistan, people are racist against their own people. So it's like levels of darkness. So, you know, I grew up with that. And then I grew up with also racism against white people. So, oh, wo to gori hai, right? Gori is a word for white. And it's seen as derogatory by some people. So, oh, she, you know, so, but at the same time, with our lovely post-colonial sort of, you know, this history and legacy, there's this whole narrative of the worship of the white man. And it exists to this day. So we have our northerners are white with green eyes. They're Pakistani. And some say that it's a Hellenic sort of, you know, from the early Hellenic traditions and Alexander, and that's why they're white. And, you know, so for someone like me, it's just so, it's so deep. It's so deep. It goes so deep. So even, I shouldn't say this, but even within my own family, you know, they sort of, if I had been different, if I had not been me, I may have been taught to hate myself in some ways. You know, this derogatory word Paki was used in my home for Pakis, and we were Pakis. And then, you know, I grew up there, and now I'm here, which is where, you know, the white side of my family is from. I think it's important to just sort of keep it, it's very relevant. It's relevant to my life. My daughter is also now mixed race, you know, and in many conversations with other amazing women at this time of South Asian descent, especially we all sort of came together. And obviously it was on social media, but it was really lovely to find each other and back each other up. So for me, this time has been amazing because I've had so much support and solidarity from so many people, and it's been great to get this stuff out, you know. Let the white supremacists come, fine, come, you know. It's been important. So I hope that's what you were looking for, or I hope that, yeah.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for your contribution. And we're looking at the theme of imperial consequences, racism and equality. And so far we heard Dzifa saying that she grew up in Africa, and she found that actually the concept racism were more or less unknown and alien.
Well,
in a way. In a way. Mm-hmm.
I just, you know, picking up on what Sasha's saying, there was colorism, you know. So again, you know, the fairer you were, it was almost like you were white adjacent, you know, and that was a sort of aspiration. And, you know, a lot of that manifested in women, you know, and the onus was on women a lot of the time to be fairer. You know, so this thing where they're bleaching their skin, you know, with very dangerous chemicals and that sort of thing. So, you know, I was aware that racism existed, and I was aware of the effects of racism, you know, but in terms of experiencing it directly, that only happened when I came back here. So, yeah, so it you know, I was aware of it, but I just hadn't experienced it myself.
Thank you so much. And we also listened and heard Aidan talking about white privilege and being white, male, heterosexual, and how he sees that, as well as the reality of being an editor and coordinating the publication of a poetry magazine in a modernist tradition, at a time where you receive more submissions that are said by male than female, and whether is that a reflection of your own of the reality? Is it a reflection of the sense of self-entitlement coming from male authors? There is a lot of discussion and thought around that. So far, we've touched a bit on the theme, but if you have questions and if you would like to engage with our guests, please use the chat box that you can address questions, and then we will organize a way in which our guests will answer. And just to throw it out there, just before we start the second part of our session, which will be readings, talking about the imperial consequences, racism and equality in a time of pandemic, in a time of hardship in terms of arts. I would say I've took part in a little experiment and testing the strength of our literary system, as well as our structure that we have in supporting writers in Britain. Therefore, I looked at the Society for Authors and the way the Society for Authors has supported various writers throughout this pandemic. And things have been really tight, and it's true. I found it really interesting to find, for instance, on their website, information that was linked to the fact that part of the donors that supported the Society for Authors requested that the funds that will support writers in Britain throughout the pandemic be allocated to young people that are British born. And I found this particular aspect rather fascinating, as well as intriguing, and raised the whole discussion about being British born and being supported by the Society of Writers, and how actually the community is supporting anybody in this time. So if you have any comments around this theme, please engage with us. The second part of our evening will move on to readings, and we will start with Dzifa Benson that will read for us from her work. Then we'll have Sasha Akhtar to read for us, and then Aiden Simmons. Dzifa?
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to start with a poem which luckily is being published in the new Blood Axe anthology called Staying Human. And I guess it's a poem that I think of, if I was a poem, this would probably be it. This is probably what I would look like. It's a kind of, it's a little bit experimental, you know, when you see it written down. And I guess it really describes me. And I chose it to read it for this particular session because I remember when, George Floyd was killed and the Black Lives Matter protest started, feeling very vulnerable and raw, as a Black person. And also this thing in my head, why do people despise Black people so much? Why is there hate? I just don't understand that way of thinking. So, when that kind of thing happens, you need things that root you. And I guess when I wrote this poem, it was, to kind of root me, to kind of let me know who I am, so that when those kind of things happen, it doesn't unmoor you. So this is called Self-Portrait as a Creature of Numbers. I shifted into this human life from the spirit world, the fusion of one egg and one sperm at 8:42 p.m., where latitude 51 degrees 31 minutes north straddles longitude 0 degrees 6 minutes east. London, N19 to be exact. At 8 days, my mother outdoored me, crossed the threshold back and forth 7 times, whispered a prayer over 3 glasses, dabbed my tongue, 1 drop from each, water, honey, salt. She showed my face to the 4 elements, each in turn, punched 2 holes in my earlobes. To bind mind, body, and spirit to a destiny of life path 1, she took 3 new laid eggs, cracked them open over my head. First daughter of a 4th son of Ghana, my soul surges 8 degrees 0 minutes north of the equator, 2 degrees 0 minutes west of the prime meridian. I march to a 4-beat over 50 million knots on this ocean called forever, knowing that bigger, better numbers can be reached by always adding just 1 more. Sketched from 300 moons minus 3, plus 25 Valentine cards I never received. I'm ruled by luster bouncing off the evening star, 2nd planet in 108 million kilometers from the sun. So if you encounter me in the underground, standing 1.66 meters tall on the escalator, going up or going down, know that I own 1,001 options raised to the power of infinity plus 1. Philosopher, seeker, teacher when I am willing, always climbing 1 more number, at the very least 1. So the next poem I'm going to do, I'm really interested in, I guess, writing about women. And this particular poem, I think, when I started to write it, I wrote it in London, but I think the spark for it was when I went to Ghana to my grandma's funeral. I think this was in about 2005. And we went to her hometown, which was in a more rural area. And we also visited the graves of my ancestor, both on my grandma's side and on my grandfather's side. And it was quite a feeling. Going back about 4 generations, or maybe 5 generations that I'd come from. And then hearing the stories as well, and hearing the stories of how people moved around, how I had relatives in Togo, but they were in Togo because of the way, you know, Africa had been partitioned during colonialism. So when it came to writing this poem, it sort of came up against something I read in the paper about a woman on a coach traveling somewhere in Europe, and who accidentally joined the search party looking for herself, because when it came for the time for the coach to depart and they were checking off all the people who were supposed to be there, somehow they missed her, and somehow she missed the fact that they missed her, and she joined in the search party for herself. So I think, you know, maybe I was that woman in, you know, the incarnation of this poem, and this butted up against writing about my female ancestors. So this is called Myself When I Am Real. When I was Echa, the African grey, I said, even if I am bleeding, please look at my red tail feathers. You'll find I'm still whole. I was my twin, Evi, void and belly full at the same time, raging and hungry as the grey sea, my throat closed like dough that can't rise. I was cousin Kafui when every moon was blue. What was the word going round and round in my head? I let it dry on me like a wet shirt. I was loving Afi, despair sitting fat inside, rearing its jaundiced head. I wasn't lost, but I set myself free. Living loud in my elsewhere, I became the last girl, Mansa. My mother's voice said, remember, Nuna, a little bit of purple lipstick changes your day. I spent my time wishing I was a wolf with his soft underbelly and big animal gaze. Now I am Brandina, my great-great-grandmother. I spread myself so thin and green, I am an elephant's back in Phuket, a beach in Anloga, a discarded shoe in Boston. Through the wing of a dragonfly, I point to darkness. Soon, I will become Fafali, the youngest. And the next poem is, I guess, one of my more experimental poems. It's the kind of poem I read sometimes without contextualizing it and framing it, and people think, what the hell was that? So tonight I am going to contextualize it a little bit. When I was a bit younger, I used to be a bit of a jazz head. So I really loved, you know, and I especially liked bebop, I guess the most difficult version of jazz. So I liked people like John Coltrane, I liked, you know, Miles Davis, Ornette Coleman, Thelonious Monk, that sort of thing. And when I wrote this poem, I think I was also thinking about the history of Black people and the history of Black people in the diaspora as well. So again, that kind of combined with my love of jazz, and it's called The Counterplayer Gazes In and Lives to Play the Tale. 1. On the cliff face of this wet indigo, he is the man who tied water. 2. A trumpet blares. The prince is in a hurry to dance in the street. 3. Sometimes it sounds like the boom of the earth stretching and yawning. Sometimes it's as erudite as a tabla drum. Most times it's as if he's about to regurgitate a star. 4. When I die, turn no corner, bend no curve, take me straight to Agoko. 5. What kind of food is a song? 6. He'll see you in that space between finger and pluck, between the decay of sound and the priest who tells you these palm oil plantations have been 1,000 years in the making. 7. With spoilt embouchure, I carry a sputtering flame in this house of mirrors, rip the mother of all sorrows into the sky. 8. He spits stories of the Mami water, coils of serpents around her neck. 9. I'll tell you of Iroko and Baobab, of a bracelet made of an elephant's tusk, of cotton in my ears and blood gurgling in my throat. 10. What is the meaning of a red baritone sax on the 5 spot at midnight? 11. Kokuvi has covered his eyes with his hands and is using his jaw to see. So that's that one. How much, how am I doing, Maria, for time? One more. Okay.
I was trying to unmute myself and I couldn't reach the button fast enough.
Okay.
So there is room for one more.
Okay.
Okay.
So I did say I would read one from the poetry collection I am writing at the moment, and it is about Saartjie Baartman, the Hottentot Venus. I suppose spark to write it came when I went on a British Council tour to South Africa, and I read a poem called Bottom Power, which David once kindly gave me editing advice on, to the audience there. And Bottom Power is about Saartjie Baartman. You know, it was my only poem regarding her for a very long time. It's the kind of poem that women really like because it really is defiant in terms of being told what our body type should be, or who we should be, or that we owe anybody pretty or femininity. But when I read that poem out in South Africa, it was in Cape Town, and somebody in the audience then turned to me and said, "What do you think Saartjie Baartman would say if she heard that poem?" And it floored me because I'd not really given that a thought. But anyway, it sort of stewed, and when I decided to work on a poetry collection, I wanted to do it in her voice, because as much as people know about her and as much as feminists own her, or South Africans call her the grandmother of their rainbow nation, or science, you know, scientists have written about her, you never ever hear her own words. At the most you hear something she said in third person, but you never hear her own direct words. So, you know, for me, I thought that that was something missing from the story of this woman. And I also think because she's been a, you know, scientific experiment and scientific object, she's been you know, she's been all these things to all people, but who was this woman? You know, who was she? So that's kind of what I want to explore in this collection I'm working on. And one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is that she was displayed in human zoos. So, you know, and looking into it and what used to happen in human zoos, you know, you see this sort of, I guess you could call it a melting pot. You know, it was really, you know, human zoos tended to be quite diverse in lots of ways. So I wanted to write, in this particular poem, I'm writing about 7 women who would have been in those kind of human zoos. In fact, you know, this one is set in Bartholomew Fair, which was which would have had these kind of people performing. So this is called 7 Lusus Naturae at Bartholomew Fair, natural born, made and fake. Miss Harvey's eyes and hair made people weak at the knees with uncommon fervor. They say I look like an angel with my hair, the pale straw color of the silkworm's silk, and my eyes a shade lighter than Indian pink. They say I'm impertinent without being impolite while maintaining a proper feminine dignity. Yet the mob at Glasgow Fair was so unaffected by my beauty, it turned me out of my cozy booth, as it also turned out a show full of wild beasts. Miss Hepson, the tall Dutch woman, dreams of dancing with a man tall enough to make her feel delicate. I cannot stand the silence, so it's the glee and the din of the stage for me. I sway among the rafters to the patter of the gaffer, to the gauge of long drum and hurdy-gurdy. I am a sister of the giraffe-necked women, daughter of a stilt-walking Titan. Home is sawdust and grease paint. Kin is the spit snarl of the rabble, half cut with pale ale. Miss Morgan, the Windsor fairy, excited in the breasts of dukes sensations of wonder and delight. It's a big world, and I'm a little person. Blood can be flowers or the very last thing you ever see. Even walking can seem like an uncanny thing when you are a simulacrum of a woman, when something has been left behind. It's a strange tongue, this one my body has to speak. But please, do not mistake the smallest of my anatomy for the smallest of a life. Miss Sedona married twice and retired, a wealthy woman. God sent me this beard. I will not take it off. How else would they notice me? This visage is a lure, toast of the mob. I am a sight to silence the baying crowd. I cheated death. I fought and won. That makes me beautiful. I bow now to the deities who live in my whiskers. Miss Hopwood silenced the room when they lifted her out of the womb. They look at me as if this embarrassment of limbs protruding from my chest is an act of war committed against them. A wound, God in the shape of a jest, the flight of chimeras in hurricanes. My body is surely not the most hospitable of hosts, cobbled together in taverns and fairgrounds in excess of the natural order of things. They can't imagine what I choose to believe in this armor. Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Miss Vaughan of the piebald skin is also a trick roper of royal lineage. Your bodies were given to you, not chosen by you. You take your bodies for granted, so you don't exist to me. When you thought of a daughter, you never expected this. Face, a shrunken old apple, my epidermis a hot to the touch patchwork of failed answers. Myth is your yawning maw. I am the moon calf who comes and goes. After the 5th time, my mother marked me so she would know me again in my other lives. Miss Bartman wears her sense of self tightly. She mustn't let it float free. Here I am, ripe and raw, carved root fashioned as woman. I am stone-born from the brow of a dark mother whose many limbs speak a tongue of glinting silver and swinging iron. I drift like a spectre. No, I give easily like an eggshell. No, I hang like a waterfall pouring down. These watchers would walk right through me, black holes where their hearts should be. My waters pouring down endlessly. Who marked me while I was in the womb? Who would curse me? I dance up and down these stages to keep myself from weeping, sing myself away with the same red song over and over again. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Dzifa, thank you very much. This is the moment where you see all the applause. And this is the moment when I just miss the sound of it. Thank you so much for your contribution and for your beautiful reading.
Thank you.
And we have next Sasha Akhtar reading for us from her latest work.
Hello again. I just want to take a moment to absorb what my poetry sister, I've known her for a long time. It's lovely to hear you again, Dzifa.
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to absorb what you've just put down there, because the Venus Hottentot is one of the most important subjects I feel to me as well, and you went into such depth with that exploration. I was very moved, and I think I'm so grateful that you've mentioned her as well, because I think especially at this time when a lot of people of color or whatever, you see, it's come out recently, by the way, that us people of color don't like being called people of color, And so everyone we're all just sort of talking about what we want to be called. You know, it's good. I'm cool with black, you know, I'm fine with that, but some people aren't. And I think at this time, you know, a symbol like the Venus Hottentot really reminds us of the kind of brutality and violence of imperialism. And we are all, we experience those repercussions. It's not gone away. We experience them, and we will experience them for a long, long time to come. So yeah, thank you. And also to just tie up a few strands, I'm neurodiverse, and my brain, it goes in many different things. So it's a struggle sometimes to bring them all back in together. So, but I wanted to say what I said about my poetry, how I never thought I was engaging with these racism, equality and imperialism. I was wrong. It turns out that I've been speaking from a place of it the whole time, and I didn't know that myself, from the fact that I learned English as a first language and not a second language, from the fact that I was raised by a white lady, and to the fact that I then left Pakistan at 18, went to America, hung out there for a while, experienced what that was like, and then came back to my ancestral, this is also my ancestral home, and have connected very much with that as well. So, and many people have also helped me realize that also the way I use language, I've broken it down. So it's like I realize now it's a decolonization. I call it a decolonization remix constantly. There's like, by entering these spaces, us bodies of color, it's an act of decolonization. So if there's one thing that you take away from my sort of ethos as a poet, is it's very much become about that. We decolonize every space we go in. But also in this whole, you know, what's been happening, it's been hard for a lot of people also not of color, and I call them all black on the inside. And I'm like, look, you're all right. I get, you know, it's hard for all of us, because again, it's what we were saying earlier, is it's not really the color, is it? Yeah. So because we've been talking about engaging in new sort of conversations and all of this, and I want to I'm going to read you something very new, actually. It's not in any book even. A lot of work has come out of lockdown, and I would very much like to premiere this particular work. I haven't prepared a split screen, but I'm going to put the photo up. So I don't know if any of you saw this image. It was the statue of Queen Victoria that was defaced in Leeds. So this piece is called A Brief Study of the Psychology of a Small Subsection of UK White Supremacists. Some findings. Exhibit A. Vicky in Leeds gets a new look. Exhibit B. White supremacist introduces the subject. Antifa and BLM thugs have defaced Queen Vic in Leeds. Sounds very sober and sad. Exhibit C. White supremacist 1 consoling the other about this. There are many racists who are trying to spike racial hatred by putting writing on statues. Don't get triggered. Exhibit D, White Supremacist 2. Nazis started by painting on the houses and businesses of the Jews. Behaving like a fascist makes you a fascist. So these were actual quotes from white supremacists talking on social media. They actually were quoting Nazis to console each other. Exhibit E. I hope the football lads wear blackface when they go down to protect the monuments. What better way to oppose the tyranny of the blacks and their supporters? Keywords: racist, triggered, fascist, Nazis, oppose tyranny. Theory: the white supremacist today seems to harbor wishes to be black, so as to legitimately be victims of racism by themselves. They want to know what triggering is, so that they then too can oppose fascism and tyranny and be supported worldwide. Oh, the white supremacist is sad. The white supremacist wants attention too. And also, the white supremacist has no fucking clue what the fuck he stands for. None. They were all cis men, if you need telling. However, this data was collected from a rallying cry by a white supremacist gang leader with 13.2K followers. The poster sports Churchill. The assault on the statue of Churchill has inflamed the unusually tiny brains of this species. A device has been placed in there, awaiting activation with the word Churchill as a password, causing them to plaster the malevolent visage of Churchill everywhere and aid the protection of said statue. Said poster is also embedded with the following. Exhibit F, the seminal anthem London Calling by vocal anti-fascist and anti-racist Joe Strummer of musical group The Clash. He has passed, but having been triggered by his desecration of his legacy is rising from the grave to take vengeance. A map was shared marking all known whereabouts of statues so as to direct the white supremacists to them. The rallying cry was shared 1.3K times and liked 2.3K times. Click your heels 3 times and summon Strummer. If you are out there, he will preside. So I suppose there's there's a lot of channeling that went into that. So my work is a lot about channeling whatever these passions and emotions that we have constantly as humans, and a lot of my work has come from trauma as well. But this was my need to do something, and I did all this research. You know, I had to, because when we are in this deluge of social media, and I think it becomes this big wall of information. So what is pertinent at this time? You know, what can we say that people will remember? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to read from, so this is one of my new books, Love Like Blood, with the wonderful, wonderful knives, forks, and spoons. Now, I'm not sure how it's going to go on Zoom, but I want to do this because it's very special. Alec did some work on this with me, and I'm going to have to show it to you a little bit for it to make sense. Well, just not sense, but you need a visual, and I'm sorry I'm not fancy with the screens and whatnot. So I'm going to take it really close so you can just see the texture of the text. There's a lot of labels in there and a lot of names of things. That's basically what you should know. It's a bit long, and I'm going to stand up, because that's the other thing right now, isn't it? We're all boxes. We're all in these boxes, aren't we? So the process of writing this poem was a walk to Bond Street. So this points a finger to my sort of communist leanings. Texted plein air poem on Bond Street spliced with communist manifesto. 4:42 p.m. Batil, a woman, the bourgeoisie, with a mulberry bag in heels on has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest and callous cash payment. Scooter, walk by, hear a salesperson saying, exquisite. Even the jelly shoes are £75 worth. Gold walls of Wempe. Numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms has set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade, in one word, for exploitation veiled by religious and political illusions. It has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. Ralph Lauren. Still alabaster children, sales guy looks longingly out of glass shop doors, mannequin lounges. The bourgeoisie has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers, lavishly at Menegildo Zegna. In a brown pinstripe blazer with avatar shades slung casually right next to the Sotheby's, selling a darling painting by Francesco Battaglioli and Francesco Zugno depicting colonials being served by a black slave. 30,000 to 50,000 pounds. All fixed, fast frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. 5:08 p.m. Dresses of Swarovski. Even the banks are opened longer. Here, anglicized Indian designer clothing, Nitya. Here, all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. Even the mannequins lounge at Pringle, the value of what they wear more than my entire. Old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations. Wardrobe. Time and life building. They've got it all covered. London Arms, suitcase at Asprey, 2000 and up. What about the matching shoe people buy clothes made from finest woven? In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. Light fabrics that they can't wear because the weather in England is so crummy. Silver round hammered vase, 12,500 pounds. Gun cartridge cocktail shaker, 3,900 pounds. 5:36 p.m. There are so many mirrors in these shops. How do they find themselves? Moslef, no hoodies. Bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. Solitary, clean people looking serious about their wares own these shops. They are as rich as the people. Cheap prices of commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. They are as rich as the people shopping. The shops are deserted, but I suppose one sale is enough for an army for a month. Burlington Arcade. It compels all nations on pain of extinction to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, i.e. to become bourgeois themselves. Burlington Arcade is like the red carpeted secret road to riches if it's all about global economy, international, whatnot? How come I see only white mannequins? Even the shops could be art. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. 5:41 p.m. Sun, Spell, Sea Island, Cotton, John Smedley, Fabergé, The Ritz, London. 5:56 p.m. Minamoto Kichuan, like restaurant, hush on a quiet street. People, society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. Smarting at the sun as their BMW turns a sunny corner. Cartier doorman. 6:02 p.m. I hear someone say metallics are in. Last three small. 6:13 p.m. I am spat out into Piccadilly Circus. 56 million annual onlookers being exposed to the illuminated sight on foot, in buses, on coaches, in taxis, and in cars. Pigeons compete for space to expunge alongside decay. Ruse with dubious means of subsistence and of dubious origin alongside ruined and adventurous offshoots of the bourgeoisie were vagabonds, discharged soldiers, discharged jailbirds, escaped galley slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazzaroni, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, macaro, pimps, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, tinkers, beggars. In short, the whole indefinite disintegrated mass thrown hither and thither. Names beaded with light flashing, McDonald's. Pigeons, pigeons, then Coke screams, pigeons, Hyundai. We are competing for air. 6:18 p.m. That eternal meat on which governments thrive, the great rabble of the people, underdogs, dregs of society, almost unpopulated by bourgeois civilization, which carries in its inner being and in its aspirations, in all the necessities and miseries of its collective life, all the seeds of the socialism of the future, and which alone is powerful enough today to inaugurate and bring to triumph the social revolution. 7:02 p.m. That eternal meat. Thank you. Just to say, the sources are an essay by Karl Marx, which was published in Die Revolution, and something by Mikhail Bakunin on the International Working Men's Association and the Manifesto of the Communist Party. I won't read anymore because, you know, it's pretty highly charged stuff. So.
Sasha, thank you so much. Thought-provoking reading, and really appreciate the fact that you shared with us a premiere. Beautiful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Thank you. This means a lot being here.
And we are moving towards listening our final guest. Last but not least, poet Aiden Simmons. And I think Aidan will read a bit from his latest book, There Will Be Singing, that has just been published with Semmens books. And the book came out not long ago. I think it's just a month, just over a month ago, Aidan.
That's right. I don't know about not least, I do feel least in this company. They're two fantastic readings, which and as ever with the Tears in the Fence Festival, you get echoes in what you hear from other people of what you do yourself. And that, I don't know how you do it, David, but there's something about this festival. Every time at the Tears in the Fence Festival, I've felt a sense from other people that I'm getting reflected back what I'm about to produce. It's wonderful. So anyway, you pick that up. I think particularly, I mean, I love both of those readings, but particularly from that last piece of Sasha's, one of the things I'm planning to read definitely seems to echo. Anyway. Anticipate what you will, this edifice will not disappoint you. Certain localities, like certain people, please us at first sight. At once you are transported back to the days of the patriarchs. Throngs of elegant vehicles pass and repass every afternoon. You are a nomad, a voyager on a petrified ocean with rolling waves of sand close by a ruined fountain at which combatants would wash after the conflict, petted and admired by soft white hands patting brawny musculature. Some vegetation covers this apparently barren rock, and frequently the mouth of a cannon protrudes from a bed of flowers. To a certain extent, all seaside places resemble one another. The pleasure seekers depart with the first cold autumnal storm. They nevertheless preserve unchanged their forefathers' primitive habits of dress, their costumes exceedingly odd and amusing, their lives toilsome and cheerless. Lined with quaint and picturesque medieval buildings and that fatal field where the modern mingles with ancient gaiety, splendour and woe, before the rude cabins rise frequently tall, foul posts, carved from top to bottom into grotesque resemblances. With their unintelligible decorations, letterings and mysterious rooms, the combination of monosyllables slip from the memory like drops of water. The entire audience smokes, and the performance goes on amid hideous beating of drums and gongs. The gambling dens and opium sellers should be visited in company of a policeman, and pilgrim troops in tenement houses of men dozing in half-drugged sleep. In this paradise inhabited by devils, it is clatteringly difficult to imagine how a photographer ever contrived to represent the street as tranquil. For civilization is immeasurably to be preferred to despotism, and here the hallowed waters are lined with temples and booths where idols are sold. The science of the ascent has now been reduced to a system. With fine weather and suitable precaution, there is no very serious danger. Grip the thread or wire well between your thumb and middle finger and pull gently but firmly until the mechanism releases. Do not attempt to imagine what consequences your action may have. I hope you realise that's not my voice there. That poem, Wonders of the Age, is composed almost entirely of phrases drawn from a late 19th century photo book of famous scenes and places from around the world, which I guess reveals something of an imperial outlook. Since many of my poems are created by a process largely of collage and editing, I've given myself license here to put together a sort of collage or medley of bits from my book, which Maria kindly referred to, There Will Be Singing, which seem collectively to have a bearing on tonight's theme, and indeed the general festival theme of lost connections, light and darkness. We watched the news with the sound turned down, on secular transcendence of falling towers, tear-streaked infants in bombed-out plazas, migrants at the gates of a gated hell, crusts in their multilingual hands at the alarm-wired portal. You say nothing we remember today may be of significance tomorrow. To see is not to understand, things photographed or passed over, old texts that speak of mysteries, the sick asleep in temple sanctuaries for fear of the image, reification of the word. Dust of the country, dust of the town, weave together on the wind. Where a traveller might stumble on an ancient site, old men sit under arches, tombs robbed of artifact and bone. And how we learn what happened here in passing fragments, not quite believing or not wanting to believe. How far then do those gods of yours protect you from the brutalities of strangers, the sins and things of living? We come from Bukovina and from Pliskova, from Stalingrad and Ur, our hammers and our hoes beaten and shaven into musketry and halberds. We arrive by longship, raft and frigate, by troika and Sikorsky, bent and bundled in the backs of vans, in troop trains, trucks and ocean liners, escaping factories and evading fires that gather round the rooms we tried to make a living in, with livid looms in Marshall Mills. There has never been so much fucking in odd corners. Angels cluster in those malodorous clouds that linger over burnt-out towers, inaptly and unsafely clad by bureaucrats routinely on the take, because that's just how things stand. With fingers in every pocket, the people's chosen malefactors ease their way on shiny palms while others can go hang. There has never been so much smoke hanging over the suburbs. That place where High King Brian, Muchad and Tweddlebach died, Earl Sigurd and Brodir of Man were slain, is become a suburban transport hub. From here you may catch a train to Connemara or a plane to Timbuktu. You may even have a hovercraft to carry you home. We come from Gondwara and the heights of Abraham, from caves carved under cratered cities and plains where the buffalo roamed. We come by battle bus with bent backs to harvest your provender and sweep your streets clean of every incriminating trace. There has never been so much blood on the nighttime streets. Your death may be a metaphor and yet still be your death. There has never been so much wrath in the public prints. There's never been so much fucking in odd corners. Here in the People's Palace of Dream, we approve old posters of the martyrs, faded now nearly to white, on shrunken city walls that have seen better times. Applaud with nostalgia slogans from the era of revolt, public executions for witchcraft committed by those who signed up for a gun and a new pair of trousers. The desert too encroaches, whispering among the living spaces, preserving ageless libraries from our depredations in airless desiccation. Spread towards us on the wind as we edge away in our anxiety, rival militias headquartered in the former university and a disused zoo. This child's grin has lost its charm along with its teeth, not from growth and replacement, but from the imposition of discipline and the handle of a spade. There's never been so much brutality delivered through the lens of a camera. Down by the harbour, a man in a comical hat is sorting fish from fish, box by box, his attention so wrapped in scales and eyes, he seems not to notice the wound in his thumb, from which his trickling blood mixes with that of the catch. A god is standing by the gateway to the underground. Should you notice him, you'd see a faraway look in eyes that reflect the different sky. The contortions of the mad are carved in code stone on pediments poised above entrances to the House of Nostalgia and Guns, where previously they played. The museum is styled Imperial for the nation's success in exporting war to those faraway places where spilled blood was visible only on the map. What takes place beneath those acres of plain roofing in zones where the map appears blank? And where shall we go if the map is wrongly drawn? Is the shivering of the children from excitement, fear or cold? Is it the future we dread or the past? What happened, they say, is unimaginable, and you may try to console yourself by imagining all this is in imagination only, that the disturbed sounds beyond the high lattice mean neither conflict nor threat, that this cell and its two familiar walls are mere artifacts in the wrong eye of your mind, and yourself merely a character in one of your own fictions. There has never been so much fucking in odd corners. So here now a flavour of the poem I mentioned earlier, Krasnogorsky, from my previous book, which is largely about the Russian Revolution, but also its after effects, and this obviously after effects. Krasnogorsky. Water comes frozen home in metal churn, hand drawn on a wooden sled, shadows on linen white snow taller than the house, its regimental blue-framed windows no higher than the satellite dish behind the picket fence for telephone connectivity, where Raisa has nursed her husband through 2 bouts of the sickness. After this slumber, my blood began rising for no reason. Headaches beyond the word affect your mentality on edge of nausea and memory loss. The mine now a ruin, 6-story living blocks in concrete geometry tumbled at the corner under weight of snow, the bared walls' colour matching that of the sky. We have some doubts. The village has an odd place, and strange weather patterns are often forced to go smoke chimney up, down, instead of up. So many sent their children to other towns. I live on this street for 60 years. Now where will they send? A few dozen families remain where thousands work uranium from the hard earth in another country, another political time. Sometimes I think they know the reason, and they are doing this to drive us from this place in voluntary resettlement, to re-establish some remote area. I saw a house they offer. I do not want to live in such condition. You cannot see from here the human pelts, the traffic in the cities and the trade in lives. You cannot see the purpose of the power dug out of the ground round here. You cannot see from here the rocket launch site raised to rain destruction on far lands, now flinging into orbit satellites for the navigation of family cars and vans. My brain switched off. That's it. I don't remember. I understood on waking that I'd fallen asleep. I saw my daughter delirium, and you do not want it again. Margarita was horrible hallucinations, looked at me and told, Mama, you have 3 eyes, and there's something crawling on the radiator. Tests are ongoing on the air, soil, water, food, animals, building materials, and the people themselves. The broken settlement settling into the soil, homes of miners once dispatched from the centre, now a foreign land. A lack of scientific facts led to suspicion of the mine that fed its power to nuclear weapons and energy plants. Radiation is within permissible levels, and the concentration of heavy metal salts, elevated levels of radon, were ruled out as the cause. There are no reports of similar occurrences in mining times. We don't have results of the studies in our hands. Some measures must be taken. This is a chance for the residents of our village to find new homes and new lives elsewhere. Dear Kareem, based on the above, please pay attention to the situation in the village Kalachi, and that to date there is no clear conclusion of the authorised body of the reasons that cause encephalopathy of unknown etiology, despite the large number of studies. Meanwhile, villagers notice the disease progresses on warm days. Currently, new patients with symptoms revealed 3 to 4 times a week for almost 2 years. Population 1/4 of the village. The first patient admitted March 2013, today 64 sick. We have some suspicions. We are all in fear of falling asleep between hauling water from the standpipe. And then she looked over my shoulder and cried, Mama, you have 3 eyes and something is crawling on the radiator. And finally, back to the Victorians and their glorious empire. And this one particularly seemed to me to be the one that echoed that wonderful communist inflected poem of Sasha's. Again, this is entirely quotes. None of these words are originally mine. It's something of the Victorian imperial spirit embedded in it. It's mostly genuine catalogue of items from one man's cabinet of curiosities or Ark of Marvels. Rendered, though you may not tell by the way I read it, in iambic pentameters, just because why not? A portrait of Julius Caesar, a looking glass, an African charm entirely made of teeth, a North American canoe and a stone axe, Napoleon's silver-handled toothbrush, a sign from a Viennese apothecary's shop, the bell and bauble of King Henry's Fool, a Dutch still life, a bust of Attila the Hun, a Madonna fashioned in feathers from Indian birds, a genealogical table of England's kings, a needlework map of Britain, a striking likeness of Moses, an organ in mother of pearl, a clock with a mighty Ethiop riding astride a rhino, a sundial shaped like a monkey, a mermaid's hand, the tail but not the horn of a unicorn, a pair of Galapagos terns and a taxidermed booby, the last known dodo, an array of shoes in every global style, a cunning machine for translating sounds to colours, images to series of musical notes and tones, a Chinese torture chair of lethal blades, a fine carved Aztec sacrificial knife, prosthetic limbs in polished wood and leather, a pile of amputation saws, a device for preventing masturbation, nickel-plated, a brass corset, a chastity belt of iron, the mummified corpse of a young Peruvian boy, a feeding bottle in the rough shape of a bird, an ivory model of a pregnant woman, open, a case of assorted implements for birth, a glass syringe, a guillotine blade, used, a snuff box in the head of a horned ram, a dentist's signboard strung with 100 teeth, the moccasins worn by Florence Nightingale, 3 tons of worthless metal, 5 of old photos, 2 of wood boulders, Darwin's walking stick, a case of 50 glass eyes, a wooden leg, a Sinhalese dancing mask, steel safe doors, many useless tools, some obsolete hoists, 3.5 tons of swords, 2.5 of guns, cannons, helmets and shields, 110 cases of Greco-Roman artifacts, 85 of surgical instruments, 60 of pestles and mortars, a hoard of gourds from Guatemala, and an urn containing the ashes of the collector.
Thank you so much, Aidan. And reflecting on all our readings tonight, I think that we've listened to 3 different voices, but voices that complement each other and actually worked very well in enhancing the theme that we have for this festival, but also enhancing the idea of consequences equality and racism, but in different way. Now we're moving towards the third part of our session tonight, which is the interesting part of questions and answers. We initially planned the session to run in a way that felt that if you had a question, you could type it